Go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Polls closed a little over an hour ago with 16% of the vote counted. Roy Moore is leading by a little over about 2 points. Early, just 16%. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a long night, to be honest with you. Let me throw that out there right away. I think it's going to be a very long night. This could be a razor close election. And again, it comes down to turnout. From people that I've talked to who are on the ground down there today, they say turnout's been really, really great. And that is, well, it could be a good thing for Doug Jones. Regardless of what happens, the fight doesn't end. I don't see how you can seat somebody in the U.S. Senate with this kind of a background. And again, I know the voters have spoken, and this is going to be a tough call for the Republicans. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in the Republican leadership right now watching this going, oh, please, 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 don't vote for Roy Moore. Now, it was an interesting closing argument. Both candidates, like in any campaign, you go out, you make your case to the voters. Doug Jones came out and said, look, I'm going to be I'm not going to be the senator for everybody. I will sit, I will listen. We will learn from each other. I will be a public servant. I will do what I think a U.S. senator should do. Made the very, case of, look, we might not always agree, but, we're always going to work together, and that kind of conciliatory, hey, let's come together kind of thing. As where Roy Moore made a very interesting closing argument, the I'm not a pedophile closing argument, which is interesting because he brought out an army buddy to help with it. And it was the most bizarre kind of closing argument that I think I've seen. Evidently, while Roy Moore and his army buddy were in Vietnam, they went to a kiddie brothel with another. This is the closing argument. The third wheel, it was his last night in Vietnam, and he tricked them into going to the kiddie brothel, and because they were going to have a couple of beers to celebrate, and immediately, Roy, before any of the girls could come and attack him, said we shouldn't be here, and they left. And that's the closing argument. I was in a kiddie brothel, but I left. Now, there's a couple of ways of looking at that. I heard the story and I go, is it possible he was in the kiddie brothel? You were standing there with him. He didn't want to get all excited and he ran because he didn't want you to know. And then for the rest of his life, he went back to those moments and said, hey, I missed my opportunity here. I don't know, but it's an interesting closing argument. That we went to a kiddie brothel, and the way the guy told the story was, you have to watch the video. It's really just kind of, bizarre. And it's bizarre the reaction that the people in the audience gave. because there were a lot of pretty girls there, and there were a lot of young girls there, and then laughter in the crowd. I'm going, that's not something you generally laugh at, and it was just bizarre. And I'll be honest, this whole election has been very bizarre. So tonight, interestingly enough, it's going to come to, as it always does, and these are cliches, it's going to come down to the get out the vote effort. If the Democrats did a good job of getting their voters out, they can do all right. But at the end of it, it's going to come down to the Republicans. The people who identify themselves as Republicans, they're going to be the ones who either they're going to stay home or they're going to hopefully come out and vote for Mickey Mouse, or who knows. Now, in order for Jones to have a shot, he's going to have to win really, really big. It's kind of like Pennsylvania. I mean, there's a reason that James Carville called the center part of Pennsylvania Alabama. It's a lot. Alabama's a lot like Pennsylvania, and vice versa. If you win the big urban areas, you got a shot. And the big 4 urban areas there in Alabama are obviously Jefferson County, which is Birmingham, Madison County, which is Huntsville, and you got Mobile and Montgomery, which are the big counties. Also, large African American communities. In fact, he's going to have to carry those 4 counties somewhere in the 60 to 70% range, if not higher. Now, Hillary Clinton did really well there, but not well enough, which brings us to what's going to happen for Jones to win. And in my view, what has to happen is, well, Republicans have to stay home. And some of the counties that you're going to be looking at, and I'm watching the following, I'm following them tonight, is Shelby County is one of them, a suburb of Birmingham, really, really very, very conservative, really bad. Hillary Clinton only got 23% of the vote there. Roy Moore, oddly enough, didn't do as well in 2012 as Mitt Romney did. Mitt Romney outgot him by 14 points in Shelby County. Another place, Baldwin County, which is next to Mobile. It's on the Alabama Gulf Coast. I think we went through there when we were on our tour. But like Shelby County, obviously a very conservative area. High, but this is a little, high incomes. People who have a little bit of money and vote for Republicans. And I would argue for the tax stuff and some of the other stuff, not so much the social craziness. Could be wrong. But Moore, got 12% less of the vote in that county in 2012 than Mitt Romney did when he was running, I believe it was for governor. And again, you go back and you look at this stuff where, Baldwin County, Hillary got 19% in 2016. Jones is going to need to do a lot better. Understand, Baldwin County was one of the first places that Steve Bannon went to have his little event. In fact, last week was the place that they went. And if you looked at Trump's event last week as well, it's right next door to there. So for them, this is one of those areas that this is where the Republicans have to get out the vote and have to keep those folks on their side. And, some of this stuff, look, it's easy to say Alabama's a bunch of knuckle draggers and mouth breathers. There are some very high educated, high income areas around, aerospace and all of this as well. Those folks tend to vote for Republicans. But the hope is by having some bit of intellect, they're going to look at this and go, not so much. Maybe these aren't going to be Moore's base. And maybe they stay home, or like I said, maybe they vote for Mickey Mouse, or heaven forbid, they vote for Doug Jones. And Limestone and Morgan County is also a place that I'm keeping an eye on as this goes on to see, where this all comes out. I'm not optimistic that he's going to do well, because understand, in those counties, Hillary got somewhere in the low 20s, and he's going to need somewhere in the 35 to 40 range. So there's a lot here to overcome for the Jones camp. And I think, you get this. Also, are you going to do well in the college towns? Are you going to do well in Tuscaloosa County, and you're going to do well in Lee County? Tuscaloosa County is where University of Alabama is, and Auburn's in Lee County. You're going to do well in there. Now, look, those are Republican counties. They tend Republican. But because this isn't a normal election, in my view, is it possible you're going to get some of those votes swinging? Sadly, Hillary only got 38% in Tuscaloosa and 36 in Lee County. Moore's going to have to do much, much better than that. And the other thing that I'm watching, and look, I'm watching a lot of things on this, for me, the big one is, will Moore lose his home county? Will he lose his hometown county of Etowah, where the Gadsden Mall is? Will the Gadsden Mall, will they get out the vote for Roy Moore? Now in 2012, when Romney ran, Romney got 68% of the vote in Moore's home county, where Moore just got 55. In fact, Moore lost his home county in both the 2006 and 2010 Republican primaries when he failed to run for governor, when he failed his gubernatorial run. The other 2012 was to get back on the Supreme Court, which again, he got thrown out of, which there might be a pattern here. I don't know. But for me, this is going to be one of these interesting moments because, as I tweeted out earlier today, folks in Alabama, your grandchildren are going to be saddled with your decision because this is one of those elections that, I would have never thought Alabama was anywhere near in play. Had they stuck with Luther Strange, this would have been, you would have heard of Doug Jones in passing. I don't know that you would have seen the kind of campaign and the kind of money that went into this by having someone who Republicans would have just, flipped the lever for. But this guy, there's so much here. And, the pedophile thing is one thing. The Russian thing's another. This theocratic mindset, this intolerance, this rigidity that I think is scary even to moderate Republicans, and should be, because, at the end of the day, you're moderate Republicans, you're viewed just like a liberal. You're not on board. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out as the votes come tallying in. There's about 30% of the vote in right now. Like I said, the poll's been closed for a little over an hour. And right now it's a 51 to 46 race right now, and 2.7% other. So Mickey Mouse is getting about 2.7% of the electorate, which I'd like to see that around 5 to 7. I think that would be something good. Anyway, we talk about this most of the night, lots to get to tonight, but this is kind of the focus. This is, to me, one of the big issues. It is the big issue of today, along with some of the nonsense Trump threw out and some things in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Lots and lots and lots to get to. Love to hear your thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. You can also chime in, give us your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, Adam Parkamenko is going to be here to give us his thoughts, share his ideas on maybe what's going on down there in Alabama, and, well, what happens if Roy Moore actually does win. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. That's all.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was the day President Truman appointed a fact-finding panel to investigate the General Motors strike. As many as 320,000 UAW GM workers had been on strike for nearly 3 weeks. They had suffered deep wage cuts, deteriorating working conditions, and endless contract violations during the war. The UAW workers now demanded a 30% wage increase. But President Truman and GM acted as if it was still wartime. Truman ordered a 30-day cooling off period to be followed by compulsory arbitration. Just 2 days earlier, 10,000 strikers picketed GM, encircling their downtown headquarters for over an hour. The CIO held an emergency conference vowing to continue and spread the strike. CIO President Philip Murray took to the radio in defense of the strike. He noted that corporations had made millions in wartime profits, that wage cuts since VJ Day had been as high as 50%, and denounced Congress for burdensome new tax laws. Murray added that Truman's proposed Fact-Finding Act and other anti-labor laws served to, quote, weaken and ultimately to destroy labor union organizations. Bob Carter, chairman of the AC Sparkplug Strike Committee and chairman of the Greater Flint CIO Council, remarked, "I am against arbitration and will oppose the setting up of fact-finding committees. Anyone acquainted with the labor history of this country knows that those committees are used by political stooges of the corporations to cheat workers out of their just demands." The strike ended in partial victory the following March, with strikers winning a 17.5% raise, just over half their original demand. But UAW members demonstrated their solidarity and their refusal to be cowed into going back to work on the government's terms.
Free and open access to the internet is a virtuous democratic principle known as net neutrality, meaning the system doesn't care if you're a brand name corporation or an unknown startup, a billionaire or a poverty wage laborer. You are entitled to equal treatment in sending or getting information on the World Wide Web. However, corporate executives never let virtue stand in the way of profit. We're told that access to this information highway is crucial to your and my educational achievement, future prosperity, and ability to be self-governing, as well as being vital to our nation's well-being. Yet, access onto the digital highway is not a public service, but instead is controlled and sold to us by a few for-profit corporations, so few of them that selling internet service has become a non-competitive market, letting service providers extract excess profits from customers. And now they've convinced Donald Trump and company to dump the idea of net neutrality, viewing its public benefit as an unwarranted obstacle to their desire to grab greater profits. Here's their scheme. 1. Rather than having one big broadband freeway open for transporting everyone's content, the Internet service monopolists intend to create a special system of high-speed lanes for the richest producers of content. 2. This express lane will be made available to those who want to rush their information, viewpoints, programs, etc. to the public, leaving everyone else's content jammed up in the slow lanes. And 3, the Internet providers will charge a premium price to those who can afford to have their content channeled into the high-speed toll lanes. This is Jim Hightower saying, a broad coalition of enraged and net-savvy groups has arisen to defend the Internet's democratic essence. You can join them by visiting battleforthenet.com.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
So early on, it's looking like, as I was saying in the last segment, Tuscaloosa and Lee County going to be interesting to watch there in Alabama. The college towns right now, with 45% of the vote in, Jones is up 57-40 in Tuscaloosa, and in Lee, he's also winning by a smaller margin, 54-44. That is a good early sign, at least as far as I'm concerned. And here to talk about what's going on, the results, and maybe some of the nonsense. Because look, I heard from some of the people I've talked to, some of the craziness down there, that active voters were listed as inactive. That there was police intimidation at some of the polls. There were lines because they didn't have enough, allocation of resources, especially in those areas. Some of the ballots were a bit misleading. In fact, there would be even texts going out saying that the polling locations had been changed. Now, to me, all of that stuff is voter suppression, and we should be locking people up for that. But here to talk a little bit about it and see where things are going to go. I've asked Adam Parker-Metko to come talk with us. Adam, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, as always. Appreciate it.
So what are we thinking of the early results? Are we feeling a little positive, or where are we at?
I'm watching some of these tweets coming through from, the folks that call themselves nerds and enjoy numbers for a living. And, I love politics, and I kind of defer to a lot of other people when I'm looking at kind of precinct by precinct results. But I think that it's incredible to sit here and, watch the vote going up and down. But more importantly, Doug Jones was an incredible candidate. I think that Democrats, not just in Alabama and around the country, but independents, Republicans, people stepped up and they did everything they could to get behind the right candidate. And at this point in our country's history, we have a lot of problems on our hands, and that's Trump and this administration and the Republican Party. And there's been a lot of Republicans that are longtime operatives and others that have stepped up to try to kind of start to move to the middle and put the country before their party. And it's going to take all of us. But I see Democrats as the defenders of the Constitution, and the fact that we're sitting here watching on TV and being on the radio and being on social media platforms, an Alabama U.S. Senate race where, no network has called it. I think that's really exciting for Democrats and the work that has gone into this race.
Yeah, but the other side of this is we're talking about running against a guy who is allegedly a pedophile, someone who has just extreme rigidity, someone who, I'll be honest, I think most rational, sane people are going to look at and say, this is not the kind of person we want sitting in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But, if we kind of take a step back and we look at even before Alabama and we look at the 2017 off year in the general election that we just had, Virginia, it was 66-34 in the state house. The state Senate wasn't up this year. In the state house, it's now tied. That was a larger flip for Democrats than since 1899. And so you all, Pennsylvania-based, Pennsylvania 18, Connor Lamb is a great candidate. We're going to have a special election there in March. And I think that's going to be a very competitive race, and one that Connor can win with everyone's support. But we are seeing on the ground people coming out and really exceeding some of these numbers from 2016. And the example that I sort of use is, in some of these parts of Virginia in the general this year, if 1,200 people had voted for Trump in 2016 and 1,100 had voted for Hillary, we saw 800 came back out and voted Republican, and almost 1,200 voted for the Democrat. And so, when we're talking about targeting our base, folks are coming out in almost presidential level numbers in many of these precincts, and so we have to target those folks. But we also we really need to be the party of that is open and bringing everyone together and for the right reasons. And I think we've always been the Big Ten party. But the Alabama Senate race, while Roy Moore is, a disgusting individual who is a rapist, a pedophile, and, just everything that nobody wants to be, and, everything that is totally not what we view America as. The fact that he does have so many people coming out and supporting him, is very problematic. And I think that, the country is divided, and, we've got a lot of work on our hands. And, he thinks that the last time America was great was when, there was slavery. But I think Doug has run an incredible campaign, and, this thing is a roller coaster. If you look at the folks that are really looking at the numbers and the way that this thing is kind of swinging back and forth. And there's historical issues in Alabama that, I haven't been able to figure out whether have been fixed or not. In 2015, post these voter ID laws, the driver license locations in areas where there was 75% or higher black voters, the ID offices were shut down completely. And in December of 2016, about a year ago, the federal government ruled that Alabama needed to reopen all of those and restore them to prior to when they closed in 2015. And I haven't been able to see whether those were fully restored. So when you were talking about voter suppression earlier, I mean, you know, that's in the digital records, copies of the ballots that we've been going back and forth for the last 48 hours. This voter fraud argument that the right pushes, you know, it's actually them that are not only suppressing the vote, but they're doing it over and over, and they're so brazen in the way that they do it.
Yeah, I mean, my grandfather always said, if someone's telling you, accusing you of doing something, chances are they're the ones doing it.
Yeah.
And this is a prime example of that. Were you surprised by the closing argument of the Moore campaign? I mean, I was watching this video of his Vietnam buddy, talking about this trip to a kiddie brothel, and I'm not sure that that's the right closing argument.
This is, I wish I could say I was older and I had tons more years behind me and tons more campaigns. But I would say in the 15 years that I've been really involved, this is one of the most bizarre things that I've ever seen. I mean, when the video came out, the Guardian video interview where he transitions from English to Russian for a few words as if it's nothing, was one of the most least surprising things of his campaign. So bizarre closing argument. I think that there were some moments in this campaign, even in the last 24 hours, that we saw where you had the peanut farmer who regrets every day the way that he spoke to his gay daughter, who committed suicide at 23 years old, who stood outside the Roy Moore rally to talk about his daughter and his story and his regret. I think that the country being on the right side of history has never been easy. And I think many of us, a majority of us, are on the right side of history. But this is one of those moments, and I hope that it's, in my lifetime, many generations to come, it's the last kind of big moment where we can really push through some of this stuff. But this is one of the hardest fights that we've ever had. And, to see some of the stories that people are talking about, the way that their children feel, or their children feel threatened, or, the fact that we've got, my son's 8 years old, and the fact that, you've got second and third graders that are talking about the president and what he's doing. And you've got a video that Now This just put out recently where they pulled together a group of students, and it's incredible to listen to how they feel about this country and how it's being run, and what the president and the Republicans are doing. And, every single one of these students that's talking and is sharing their story and talking about what they're doing to organize would be an incredible president. And so it's amazing that we have such a disgusting person in the White House, and such a disgusting Republican nominee candidate in Alabama. But ultimately, the Democratic Party is the oldest party in this country's history, and it's got a lot of work to rebuild from a national standpoint. But I think on the ground and throughout the country, I really do believe, that America will prevail, as it always has. But we've got a lot of work ahead.
Yeah. So what happens? Let's heaven forbid, let's say Moore wins, which he's up right now. Let's say he wins tomorrow. I understand the Republicans have already scheduled a meeting on, what do we do? What do you think happens tomorrow?
That's it's a great question, not just about if Moore were to win, but I think every day we all go to bed wondering what happens tomorrow. We've got our plans and we're doing this, that, the other, and you never know what news you're going to wake up to, or what irrational, crazy, impulsive thing that the president is going to say. The national debate and the things that are happening right now, and the women that are coming forward, I think that it's a very impossible question to answer. But I would just say, I hope at the end of the night here, Doug Jones comes out on top. I know there's 39% of the vote in. I don't know what folks are saying right now in terms of the outstanding precincts. It's still too early to call, but the Republican Party to watch the open divide and the infighting. When Democrats right now are having a conversation, a lot of the things that we're going back and forth are important things that we're talking about. It's we're talking about if a state is having a primary and a caucus at the same time, in 2020, what are the results going to be? Or how do we make sure that we have the strongest DNC possible, and what are the things we need to be doing right now? And, we watch Donald Trump throwing his Secretary of State under the bus, and we watch Nikki Haley coming out saying, embracing the accusers that are coming forward against Donald Trump and saying that they should be. So to be able to predict what happens, 30 minutes from now, it always seems impossible. But I think that looking at this and seeing the folks that have stepped up to support Doug, whatever happens at the end of the night, we're going to keep pushing forward tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and that's the message out of all of this, regardless of what it is. You got to keep organizing, because next year, I've been saying, and I don't know that it's hyperbolic, if Democrats don't take back at least the House, hopefully the Senate, there might not be much left for a working class in this country come 2020.
No, that's entirely right. And it's, on the right side, especially a handful of individuals, they push this notion that this sort of Trump-Russia investigation is a witch hunt. And it is extremely eerie. If you're a candidate and you're going out there and you're running, or you're up for re-election, you're a Democrat, you're running for the first time, or you're Debbie Stabenow running for re-election, you're going to talk about your message. You're going to talk about what you're doing. But at the same time, in a parallel, this Russia stuff is not just real, but the parallels between all of it. When Putin became a candidate for the first time and came from St. Petersburg to the Kremlin and was basically handpicked, and they pushed everyone else out, he was the quote-unquote law and order candidate. A line that Putin and the Kremlin love to use is witch hunt. I mean, these are all same things that, not just parallels in the Trump campaign, but it's the same whataboutism and disinformation that we're hearing from the Trump campaign. And meanwhile, every single time something new comes out in this, it's major. We were talking about Hillary's emails. Well, a single email for Trump Jr. was leaked, and that single email was about a meeting with Russians at the Trump Tower. And so we haven't seen Trump's tax returns, whether Mueller has those or not. I hope he does. I'm sure if he doesn't, he's, able to obtain them. But whether Trump falls because of collusion or whether he falls because of Russian mafia money that he's been funded through over the years, I think the financial piece of this, where every time something happens, someone goes down or is indicted or cuts a deal because they lied to the FBI or because of financial and taxes, and the Republicans say, see, this whole Russia-Trump investigation is a witch hunt, and, this is the stuff that's actually happening. Well, it's not true. We don't know what Mueller has, and in addition to, the first things, but the financial pieces are a huge part of that, and those are very much tied to Russia. So, we haven't even reached the first State of the Union that this president's given, and he goes through staff, over and over, and one out of every 3 days of his presidency, he's spent playing golf. He's spent over $80 million on trips for golf to and Mar-a-Lago properties, and then the news comes out that the Mueller investigation has to date cost $3.2 million, of which much of those funds can be used for recycled technology that will be used once the Mueller investigation is done. $3.2 million compared, to date for an investigation that is protecting the Constitution and everything that our country has stood for, compared with what this president has done. I mean, every single knock that he had, and every single projection and lie, and everything he's been throwing out there for years has come true, but because of him. Right. And actually, it was just really himself looking in the mirror.
I'll tell you that $3.2 million, best penny I ever spent.
Same here. It's like campaigns. When a candidate has to decide whether they're going to take public funding or not. I mean, we all want to see money out of politics, and we all want to see our resources used the best way. And I think that Mueller's doing an incredible job, but it is a very scary time right now. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, you're overreacting, or you need to relax." But the fact is, I mean, even today we saw the news that Trump now is pushing for a second counsel again. At this point, I actually think maybe what we should do is we should get a second special counsel, and it's Ken Starr investigating Trump for all the women that are coming forward.
There you go. There's a start. And look, he would be evidently he would be really thorough about it, because we learned an awful lot about Bill Clinton.
For folks that hadn't read, Ken Starr actually had done a piece where he was interviewed, or had written a piece, and he talked about, in hindsight, looking back at, the work that he had done, and talked a lot about Bill Clinton, and things change over the years, but I don't think there's a single Democrat out there that, if we could only pick one and we only had one choice, and it was this best former president, put in front of us, we would take them. Yeah. And really, I grew up thinking, wow, like George Bush is going to be the worst president of my lifetime. And looking back on it, whether he made a ton of terrible decisions, and there was the, Dick Cheney and the lies and so forth. But in reality, when you look at the two, I mean, I've never seen anything like this. I hope we never see anything like this again.
I'm with you. Last question I've got for you. Do you think he fires Mueller?
I think that it's something that is probably crossing his mind over and over each day. I think that, look, it's a great question. I don't know ultimately what he does. I've heard a couple kind of talking heads over, last couple months have said, whatever you predict on Donald Trump, he's probably going to do the opposite or do it later. But I think the key here is that things are really going to fall apart throughout this country if he attempts to do that. I think if he were to fire Mueller, I think you're going to see thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the streets in each community, each major city, all over. And Mueller's got a balance here too. If Mueller is going to have enough to indict Kushner or Trump Jr. as he's working his way up, we don't know what he has. If he ends up indicting someone from the family before he gets to Trump, assuming he has what he needs to do that, we don't know what's going to happen. There could be a state of emergency. Trump could look at this whole thing as a coup. I mean, the government could be unoperational. This all sounds crazy to say, but the truth is, if you look at what he's saying and the question that you just asked, that's what we're dealing with right now.
Scary, scary times. But at the end of it, it's going to come back to us standing together, standing up, and reclaiming our democracy. Adam, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Always great talking with you. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
A boy with a gun. I got a picture in my pocket of a lucky one. I'll announce the winner on the radio. With my microphone, I do a super show. I wear a cowboy hat. It is my business hat. I'm on till 1 a.m. I must tell you that I'm a man with a mission.
The Rick Smith Show. Changing America for the better.
Firefighters have been digging those fire lines to halt the flames, but now the fires are jumping right over them.
Southern California fire now the 5th largest in state history.
These companies are out there, shameless lies.
Trump administration attacks private company over national monument lawsuit. Trump to open up East Coast for offshore drilling. Plus, surprise!
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
Trump's EPA has slowed down enforcement actions against polluters.
All of those shocks and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Bears Ears alone holds more than 100,000 Native American cultural and archaeological sites. You know, if Trump goes ahead with this plan, I'm worried that Native Americans will stop trusting the federal government.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's been over a week, and these fires continue to get worse here in Southern California.
Yes, indeed they do. President Trump has declared a federal emergency to help free up federal disaster assistance. Firefighters have gained some ground against the 5 major wind-driven fires burning in Southern California, but not much ground against the Thomas Fire in Ventura County, north of Los Angeles.
You could literally feel like you're trying to put out a blowtorch with a squirt gun.
The Thomas Fire has burned nearly 400 square miles and is now the 5th largest wildfire in state history. Officials warn it may burn into January. Of the top 20 largest fires in California history, 13 have all hit since the year 2000. But the Thomas Fire is also moving up the ranks of the state's most destructive wildfires in terms of losses. Of the 20 most destructive fires in California history, 5 occurred this year alone.
And it's also worth noting that while the Thomas Fire may be the 5th largest in state history, it's the number 1 largest to take place in winter.
Meanwhile, Bloomberg News reports that the Trump administration will announce this week a plan to open up vast areas of the Atlantic coast and the coast of Florida to offshore drilling.
What could possibly go wrong?
These are areas that had previously been off limits to the fossil fuel industry, and he's doing it in spite of bipartisan opposition from state governments. In a statement, the Natural Resources Defense Council said, quote, "The Trump administration is trying to grab the pristine ocean waters Americans own and hand them to polluters for exploitation and ruin."
This will be interesting because, yes, you're right. Republicans have been against this for quite some time on the East Coast. At least many of them. We'll see if they still are.
Especially off the coast of Florida. The Trump administration announced on Friday it will suspend a rule requiring drillers to limit methane leaks from oil and gas operations. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide on shorter timescales, but also failure to require drillers to repair these methane leaks has cost U.S. taxpayers billions of dollars in lost royalties from public lands. The New York Times reports that the Trump administration's EPA is far more lenient on polluting industries than previous administrations.
Who knew?
Since the inauguration, the Trump EPA has pursued 30% fewer cases against polluters than during the same period in either the Obama or George W. Bush administrations.
That's good news. I'm surprised that it is only 30% less.
Well, the Trump administration EPA has also levied fewer and smaller fines against polluters that break the law, and regional EPA officers must get permission from Washington before ordering certain kinds of tests for water and air pollution.
Here's the test. Have they donated to the Republican Party lately?
Good point. In the wake of President Trump's decision to slash the boundaries of Bears Ears National Monument in Utah by 85%, now new documents obtained by the Washington Post show a Canadian mining company specifically requested those cuts to Bears Ears in order to make it easier for them to mine uranium.
Making Canadian corporations great again.
Now the Trump administration and congressional Republicans have launched unprecedented attacks against outdoor retailer Patagonia, a private company, over its lawsuit to block the Trump administration from reducing those national monuments. In an interview on Fox Business News, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke accused Patagonia of lying and then misled viewers about the land being stripped of special federal protection.
There's not 1 square inch of land that is removed from federal protection. So, Patagonia made in China. These companies are out there, shameless lies. They should focus on how to bring manufacturing back to this country rather than lying to the public about losing federal land.
Now, the public still owns the land, but now it's being opened to mining and drilling. Plus, Zinke has asked Trump to create a new massive national monument in his own home state of Montana to protect it from fossil fuel drilling. Local media suggests it's because Zinke aspires to run for governor and Montana voters prize their public lands.
All for me, none for thee. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
You got to give it to me. You got to give it to me. You got to give it to me.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
I got news for you. And it's going down. Before you come home and tell me you're not angry.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So let's find out what's going on around the world. In Washington, D.C., Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
You're very welcome. Glad to be with you.
So lots of big things. The big election this evening going on, mind-blowing, but also some other stuff going on around the world. The thing that catches my attention the most, evidently the Chinese are building detention centers.
Refugee camps, though perhaps they will mold into the former with time. This is an interesting story. So this is coming out of a part of the 900-mile-long border that China has with North Korea, and they are apparently starting to take seriously enough this talk coming from the Trump administration about possibly resorting to military options to deal with North Korea, that they are apparently constructing at least 5 pretty large refugee camps along that border, and also setting up some cities so that they could be kind of repurposed into areas to house these people fleeing from North Korea. Now, this is not being officially confirmed by the Chinese government. It was asked at a briefing of the foreign ministry. They've now scrubbed that question from the public record. But there are pretty credible reports from the New York Times, the Financial Times, and the BBC that suggest that construction is occurring, that there have been contracts set up with internet providers, telecom authorities to start wiring these camps up. So again, we've been hearing all this talk from the administration. Rex Tillerson came out on Tuesday and said, look, we're going to pursue diplomatic options with North Korea, quote, up until the moment the first bombs fall. And I think a lot of us had been hoping this was just bombast, tough talk from the administration. But these new reports from China suggest that perhaps behind the scenes, the Chinese are actually taking us seriously here. And that's worrisome, of course. I think we would all prefer these kind of threats from the U.S. were just threats, but they are now preparing contingency planning for what would happen if war breaks out and the Kim Jong-un regime collapses, and then you're dealing with millions of people pouring across that border.
Yeah, and just chaos in the region.
Yeah, I mean, and the Chinese are particularly averse to that. A country that likes to plan things in 5 and 10 year increments doesn't want a major influx of very, very needy refugees who would, disrupt GDP growth and funnel away resources. So again, I'm not surprised that a country like China is doing contingency planning like this, and it's very possible they actually think the likelihood of a military conflict to be quite low, but they just want to hedge their bets. And I'm sure in some cases like this, these kind of housing that's being built could be repurposed into actual just housing or state, provided camps or something like that for people who are in need of this. But again, it's worrisome when you start to see a power like China, which takes things pretty seriously and doesn't act until they think there's reason to, starting to prepare for a future in which the U.S. might launch some sort of strike on North Korea.
Yeah, or it could be the next Foxconn factories.
It's in a part of the country where there's not a lot of export activity, but yeah, I do think it's possible. And again, this is maybe to the Chinese credit. This doesn't just need to be a refugee camp, and maybe it will turn into something else later on.
Well, we shall see, but not good news. And I look at this and I go, that I don't know that anything good comes of it. I mean, I don't know. Look, I'm not the military expert, but it just seems chest thumping and all this isn't isn't helping.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out. I mean, I think we last spoke when I was in South Korea, and I went to Japan as well, and talked to a lot of military planners and people who are looking at this North Korean issue quite a lot. And all these countries in the region do have plans for what would happen if North Korea started a conflict. And that's a good thing. You know, you want to be prepared for that eventuality. The new element that the Trump administration has injected in here is this possibility of preemptive strike by the United States. I think that's got a lot of people nervous. The South Koreans don't know how to react to that, really. That's not something they've ever thought was desirable for good reason. But it again appears the Chinese are now taking this threat seriously enough, and they're capable of responding, that they're taking this on and trying to prepare. And again, I think even 5 refugee camps would probably be overrun pretty quickly. These North Koreans are incredibly vulnerable, and they would need a ton of assistance right away. And we don't know how big these camps are that the Chinese may be building. But again, it's sometimes nice when it feels like U.S. foreign policy is potentially misguided or dangerous. It's almost nice to see other countries sort of brushing us off and sort of going and doing their own thing and pursuing a different, more logical policy. But when the Chinese, who are pretty calculating here, start planning for a future in which Trump might be launching preemptive military strikes on North Korea, that's I think gives us pause.
Again, another instance of the rest of the world moving on without us. And I also look at this other story. I guess the World Bank has made some major announcements about, moving to new energy projects. What's that about?
Well, this is news coming out of a big climate summit that the French President Emmanuel Macron had sponsored on Tuesday. 50 heads of state were in attendance there. The United States not even invited. So we have given up our seat at the table when it comes to leading on climate policy. The big promise coming from the World Bank is that beginning in 2020, so not immediately, but not too far away, they are going to stop funding all upstream oil and gas projects. Now, the oil and gas industry, I might be repeating this for your listeners, but if they're unaware, the oil and gas industry usually broken up into 3 segments. So upstream is looking for new places to get crude oil and natural gas. The sort of midstream is figuring out ways to transport that energy and to refine it. And then downstream is getting it to market. So the World Bank is still going to be giving money for pipelines and other sorts of export terminals and things like that around the world. But beginning in a few years, they're going to get out of the business of helping particularly developing countries find out where they can exploit new fossil fuel projects and actually funding them. And that's been something environmentalists and a lot of environmental lobbyist groups have been asking for decades. So this is a big policy announcement. And there are a lot of pledges that come out of these sorts of climate conferences, but this one is truly significant. And it does potentially pit the World Bank against the Trump administration. I mean, the United States is the largest stakeholder in the World Bank, and the Trump administration obviously does not share this policy. In fact, at the UN climate talks a few weeks ago, the only presentation that the U.S. hosted was a presentation that basically hyped up the power of fossil fuels to be a way of dealing with global warming, which is not really an argument that makes a whole lot of sense to me. But so anyways, the World Bank taking a risk here, at least with the United States administration, but saying, look, we're going to start putting our foot down in another part of this scale. And I think it's a decision that's being pretty widely applauded today, one that was overdue, but that will actually have major consequences for the rest of the world.
Yeah, good on them. And look, the drill baby drill can only happen for so long before the rest of the world wakes up as well. Scary stuff. Let's bring this back here. I understand the FCC's expected, I guess, on Thursday, right, to end net neutrality as we know it?
Unfortunately, and no indications that the vote breakdown has changed at all. I think at this point, if you talk to folks who are leading the net neutrality effort, they're basically encouraging people who believe in net neutrality to simply go on the record, to kind of make their sentiments known, to file these formal comments with the commission, so that when this goes to the courts and when it is revealed, and this seems all but likely at this point, that there will be some sort of lawsuit alleging that Ajit Pai and others at the FCC basically ignored the breakdown of comments that were overwhelmingly in favor of maintaining net neutrality and basically didn't engage in a thorough and legitimate public review process, that they need people to keep voicing their support for net neutrality now so that the numbers are in their favor in the court process in years to come. But yeah, so the net neutrality looks like it's about to be sent to the trash heap by this administration. But what we are here, I guess not, I shouldn't say but, and what we're hearing is that the FTC and the FCC have signed an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, about how they're going to, quote unquote, police the internet once net neutrality is gone. And anybody who thinks this is some sort of, silver lining to the repeal of net neutrality is going to be disappointed, because what they are basically saying is, yeah, we're going to police the internet insofar as if an internet company lies to its customers and says, or doesn't even tell them that their internet is going to get slowed down or that certain sites are going to be walled off or more expensive, then we'll fine them for that. But they are in no way preparing themselves to have any sort of regulatory framework to constrain price increases, to constrain the amount of the internet that could be walled off, or the degree to which internet access to various parts of the net are going to be slowed down or throttled down, as they say. So, again, there was a cool story a few weeks ago about how the Indian government had given a sort of full-throated endorsement of net neutrality, and then said that they were going to police it for violations of the law. It appears what the Trump administration here is doing is taking the second part of that Indian, new policy, but not taking the first, which is obviously the much more important one. So there will be some policing of bad behavior, but much like Trump has come out and said he wants Wells Fargo to pay more for their financial crimes, but he's dismantling, it seems, the agency that's out there to actually identify financial crimes. It's unclear what the FCC and the FTC are really going to be doing to make the internet a better place once net neutrality is gone.
Yeah, we're going to have enforcement fairies, much like we have tax cut fairies and all the other stuff. Let me ask you the other side of this. Once this happens, because I've had someone say, well, 2018, we could begin to rebuild this. 2020, when there's another president, is there a way, once you open this door, once you crush this, is there a way back?
As far as I understand it, the Congress could pass a law enshrining net neutrality, and it would basically kind of invalidate what the FCC has done here. So that's a recourse. I don't think the current congressional lineup is in favor of that by any stretch of the imagination, but that's not to say that couldn't change. And the FCC is a board that is full of political appointees. So if you change the composition not only of Congress but of the White House, I think there's a road back here. But that said, I think the internet and the telecom companies have shown time and again that they are consistently able to make Americans pay more and more for services that they've long enjoyed by just sort of incremental, consistent price increases. And I think one worrisome trend here that even a sort of congressional repeal of net neutrality might not get around is, they're going to probably increase prices. People are going to get kind of used to them. And most people don't travel outside the U.S. and see how inferior our telecom services are here in the United States. So my concern is, even if net neutrality comes back, the internet companies will have created a new normal in which people are paying a lot more and their profits are up and their services are not getting better.
Yeah, paying a lot more for something that's just plain crap. I know I pay a ton for our internet service, and it's marginally better than garbage. Finally,
I don't have very many good words for those companies either.
I'm right there with you. And finally, one of the largest mall operators in the country has been sold. What's that mean?
Yeah, this is a company called Westfield. It's actually owned by an Australian man. It's getting sold to a European company for about $16 billion. We have been hearing a continual stream of bad news about the American sort of traditional brick and mortar retail industry, with malls really paying a huge financial hit during the Great Recession and sort of since the Great Recession. I mean, that one was just about overall consumer spending decreasing, and then the rise of companies, perhaps countries, one day like Amazon, who are just further, clearing out competition and decimating brick and mortar. There are some good news stories, and what Westfield had done, and this is create basically luxury malls. They found a portfolio of underperforming malls, but that were in really good areas, including at the World Trade Center in New York City, a big one out in Century City in Los Angeles. And they said, look, the one way we can get people to still go to malls in the U.S. is if we put good restaurants in them, we create really good movie theaters. We basically kind of pay a lot of money, use a lot of the cash we've got on hand to renovate these places so that they're desirable. The problem is that's a pretty unequal opportunity. You're not seeing that in a lot of parts of this country. It's mostly in big metropolitan areas. So there's somewhat good news that kind of a shot in the arm for malls that are in really ritzy areas that can pull down big restaurants and things like that. But the news across the rest of the American retail landscape is pretty bleak. I mean, we are getting a new analysis this week that about a third of America's malls could close down within the next 5 years. And they're plagued by kind of a death spiral, as it's been explained to me, in which a lot of the leases at these malls have all these provisions for the smaller tenants, which is that if you lose the big box store, if Sears goes away, if JCPenney or Macy's or the key tenant decides to bail, that all the other contracts get renegotiated because they're contingent on the fact that the traffic is going to come into the mall to go to that big store, and then you walk around and you bejewel your phone or buy some sneakers or something like that. But that is still Westfield malls are doing well, but they're a very small minority of all of the malls in the United States. So the trend is still quite far down for the U.S. mall industry, and we are just now beginning to see, I mean, the Sears decline has been going on for a long time, but they just closed down near me in New Jersey. I know they've gone down from something like 3,000 stores a few years ago to 1,000. I think that's going to keep going down. So the death spiral for many malls hasn't even fully occurred yet. And another survey this month from McKinsey, which shows that you're going to possibly lose 78 million U.S. jobs over the next decade because of automation and robotics. So, I mean, you're getting kind of a double whammy of brick and mortar getting hit, and then what we call predictable environment jobs. So that is things like long-haul trucking, other sorts of, I know people who drive trucks for a living would say it's not always a predictable environment, but that is how that labor is classified by McKinsey. And then factory jobs and other sorts of retail jobs, which can be more easily, replaced or substituted partially by automation. So it's a scary employment and economic landscape out there. And the reason I put these stories in my World News rundown a lot of times where they wouldn't normally feature is because there's still time. And I say if you're worried about your job getting cut out here, download this McKinsey report, because they also highlight 10 to 15 sectors of the economy that people can retrain into and that are going to expand in the next few decades. But a lot of these, what they call predictable environment jobs, be it in malls or on the highways or driving an Uber around a city, they're going to be on the chopping block pretty soon, and the employment landscape is pretty scary if you don't adjust quickly. Yeah, no, I drove a truck for years. I've been telling people the same thing. Get ready for it because it's not going to be around much longer. Sad stuff. Luke, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you. Thank you. Talk to you soon. Good stuff. Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was the day President Truman appointed a fact-finding panel to investigate the General Motors strike. As many as 320,000 UAW GM workers had been on strike for nearly 3 weeks. They had suffered deep wage cuts, deteriorating working conditions, and endless contract violations during the war. The UAW workers now demanded a 30% wage increase. But President Truman and GM acted as if it was still wartime. Truman ordered a 30-day cooling-off period to be followed by compulsory arbitration. Just 2 days earlier, 10,000 strikers picketed GM, encircling their downtown headquarters for over an hour. The CIO held an emergency conference vowing to continue and spread the strike. CIO President Philip Murray took to the radio in defense of the strike. He noted that corporations had made millions in wartime profits, that wage cuts since VJ Day had been as high as 50%, and denounced Congress for burdensome new tax laws. Murray added that Truman's proposed fact-finding act and other anti-labor laws served to, quote, weaken and ultimately to destroy labor union organizations. Bob Carter, chairman of the AC Spark Plug Backlog Strike Committee and chairman of the Greater Flint CIO Council, remarked, "I am against arbitration and will oppose the setting up of fact-finding committees. Anyone acquainted with the labor history of this country knows that those committees are used by political stooges of the corporations to cheat workers out of their just demands." The strike ended in partial victory the following March, with strikers winning a 17.5% raise, just over half their original demand. But UAW members demonstrated their solidarity and their refusal to be cowed into going back to work on the government's terms.
The man who sends the investor class diving for their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
The rich pay too much taxes, the poor get way too much. Instead of schools, build prisons and lock the children up. We won't believe those lies again, because God is a Republican.
Yes, and evidently not on Roy Moore's side, because with 77% of the vote in, it is dead even at 49.4 to 49.1, separated by just about 3,000 votes, with only 23% left of the vote to count, and still a lot of the heavily Democratic areas not fully counted yet. So going to be interesting. Probably going to be a long night, and probably won't even know till, well, who knows? Court challenges, lots of fun possibly on the future. And here to give us some thoughts, Bill Scheer. He is a contributor over at the Politico magazine. Bill, thanks for taking time for us.
Always a pleasure.
So what are we thinking tonight? Are we surprised at this right now dead heat?
Surprised is strong. I got to say, my inclination was that Moore was going to pull this out. I haven't seen a lot of evidence that Republicans are willing to break from their partisan loyalties in anything I've seen over the past year. But as it stands, most of the political watchers are saying that the votes that are outstanding are in heavily African-American areas, and therefore, and there's some big cities where you expect a big Democratic vote. That's why Jones probably has the edge as it stands at this moment.
Mobile being the big one, with only about 60% of the vote in, and Jones also won the two college towns, which tend to lean Republican. He won Lee County, which is reported 100%, won at 57-40, and also won Tuscaloosa County, 58-39. And again, those tend to lean Republican. So there's I don't know, maybe a shot. We'll see.
Well, what we've seen over all the special elections this year, which Republicans have all won, but the general pattern has been that the turnout drop-off relative to the presidential election last year, the Democratic drop-off has been less than the Republican drop-off. You expect a drop-off in a special election off your election,
sure,
for any contest. But the Republicans have stayed home more than the Democrats, and that seems to be the case of what we're seeing so far. Some people thought that the African-American vote in Alabama wasn't going to show up, but it appears that they have, although we'll know for sure once these bigger cities come in. It seems like the Republican areas stayed very Republican, just they're not getting the numbers that Moore wanted to get.
And that he needed. But here's the thing, and maybe this speaks to what kind of a horrible candidate this guy was. I mean, ran probably one of the worst campaigns that I've seen, and was really one of the worst candidates I've seen in a while.
Well, he didn't work the hardest. He was outspent on the air. He wasn't doing a lot of events in the final days. He probably even went to go to the Army-Navy football game in Philadelphia on the last weekend, so there's that kind of strangeness. You wonder how bad did he really want it. Roy Moore has been a perennial candidate. He's always running for something. But he perhaps was more interested in just being Roy Moore than doing everything that it took to win a close election.
Yeah, well, I also think he didn't think it was going to be a close election. Look, we are talking about Alabama after all, which they're not used to these kind of close elections.
No, there hasn't been a contested election in a very long time. The whole Deep South has moved so starkly red. But if you felt like this is, us against the world, us deeply conservative Southerners against the liberal media, the secularists, and the godless heathens and whatnot, if it's that kind of fight, well, you better fight for it. And they were basically asking people to vote their party and not care about the character of the individuals. And there are a lot of races where that logic works out just fine. So I can't say that they were completely illogical in their approach. But Doug Jones was, I think, a very strong candidate. I think he stuck to his message. He had a message for the moderate Republicans, which is, I can work across the aisle. Let's be proud of Alabama. Let's not be embarrassed by our state anymore. And he had a message for the African American electorate. I'm the guy who locked up 2 Klansmen. I have the support of Barack Obama. I have the support of Deval Patrick. I have the support of Cory Booker. This is a chance to really win. He managed to micro-target that message in a way that didn't spark a huge white backlash.
Yeah. No, and there was the one Civil War ad that I had a couple people email me about, but that was about the only trip up that I remember.
Right. I mean, he's his first time running for anything, so you can't expect the guy to bat 1,000. But as far as overall, I thought he was a pretty steady candidate and pitched his message just right for the state. Now, well, if you win, walking that tightrope becomes a lot harder once you have to cast votes. And he risks being like a Scott Brown. Scott Brown in my state of Massachusetts won a fluky special election in 2010 and could have, I think if he wanted to, he could have been the 60th senator, the guy that Obama had to go through to cut the final deal and get his agenda through.
Yep.
Instead, Scott Brown was generally the 41st senator, filibustering everything, wildly out of step with what Massachusetts wanted and expected, and his stay in the Senate wasn't very long. He got ousted by Elizabeth Warren in 2012, so he's only there for 2 years. Doug Jones will be in a similar situation. He'll have to run again in 2 years. It's not the same margin in the Senate as it was in 2010, but every vote he takes is going to be scrutinized. Are you voting with your party or voting with Alabama? And he's going to have to decide how unorthodox a Democrat is he willing to be. How much does he compare to his own state, or how much does he want to see if he can change his state? Is there a way he can speak to Alabama and say, you know what, your impression of Democrats isn't what it's not on the mark. We're not the caricature that the right is painting of us. I'm here. I'm an open book. Here's my thoughts on taxes. Here's my thought on infrastructure. Let's diffuse the culture war and talk about bread and butter. Is he able to do that? There are a lot of challenges waiting for him if he does manage to pull this off.
Yeah, and with 82% of the vote in, Doug Jones just pulled ahead by about 3,000 votes. Now, this isn't obviously going to be decided tonight because there's all the write-ins, there's all of the absentee ballots, which I'm sure we'll get to in the coming days. I just don't see a decision tonight.
Well, if it's super duper close, you might get a recount, and if there's a recount, that could take a while to sort out. I mean, if you remember Al Franken, who we think about in different lights, Chief's case, he had I think it was a 4-month recount process back in 2008, 2009. And the longer that gets dragged out, the longer Luther Strange stays in. It can vote for the tax bill or whatever else Republicans have cooked up. So, but it all depends on what these final numbers are, and it's too soon to tell.
Yeah. So what other messages do we take out of this? Is this a referendum on Trump, or is this just an isolated incident of Moore just being the Martha Coakley of the South?
Well, I wouldn't call it a referendum on Trump, but if Moore does lose, it does show the limit of Trump's popularity, even in deeply Republican areas. In the preliminary exit poll, Trump's approval was, I think, 48%. which is higher than the national numbers, which is really the mid-30s. But it's not great for a deeply Republican state with a Republican president. So there's definitely some softness there for Trump. Obviously, people are going to say, look, this guy was a child molester, so it doesn't necessarily say all that much about how strong Democrats are in red areas. But the two things I would say is, one, this is not the first state where Republican turnout was down relative to 2016. We saw that in the other special election. It's not a good omen for 2018 if that trend continues. And he'd be the second Democrat, the second deep South Democrat to win against a scandal-tainted Republican statewide in the Deep South. The other one being Governor John Bel Edwards in Louisiana. So you could say, well, that's a fluke. They had two guys who had sex scandals, and therefore they lost. But John Bel Edwards has a 53% approval rating now in Louisiana, even though he's tried to raise taxes in Louisiana. So he has put a good face on Democrats in his state. The more that happens, the more opportunities Democrats have in the Deep South to show what they can do when they're in charge. There's that chance that maybe the doom that Democrats experience in red America, maybe that ship's going to start to turn.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, a lot of this culture stuff, most people, look, they care about the bread and butter, kitchen table issues. Am I going to have a job? Am I going to be able to support the kids? Will they reauthorize the children's health insurance program? I mean, I don't think the Republicans have done an awful lot to help themselves policy-wise, looking at the health care debacle, looking at this tax plan. I mean, from a policy perspective, I don't know how a working class person could even consider pulling a lever for a Republican in this day and age.
Well, and this is always the question when talking about these issues in the Deep South. What's more important, economic issues or culture issues? And people outside the South tend to say, what's wrong with you working class Republicans in the South? You keep voting for Republicans who don't hold your interests at heart. And the response to them generally is, don't you tell me what my interests are. Maybe abortion is more important to me. That's me. I get to decide what's important to me. Maybe I don't believe you Democrats are going to help me economically the way you say you're going to. Therefore, if I don't think much of either party in economics, I'm going to vote my cultural values. That's my priority. Now, if Democrats can actually deliver or seem to be delivering on economics, and look, I defend the Obama record. I think Obama did deliver over the 8 years, but as we know, not everybody agrees with that. Or I think the delivery was that some people in white America say he delivered for blacks and didn't deliver for me. I don't think the data is there to support
that's true
that,
at all.
People believe that.
Yeah, I'm not going to go with you on that one.
I'm saying that's not what I believe, but there are people who believe that. But once they start electing some Democrats and they say, wait a second, I looked at this Democrat, he wasn't so bad. Maybe they're not as bad as I thought they were. That's the opportunity Democrats have with wins like this. Well,
we're going to see how this turns out. But, Bill, I appreciate the time. Great talking with you, man.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
Good stuff. And I think Bill's absolutely right. I mean, once the Democrats get in there and the sun comes up tomorrow, and if Doug Jones continues to hold on to this slight lead of about 3,300 votes, the sun will come up tomorrow, and maybe maybe this could be a trend. We'll see. Good stuff. Thanks so much, Bill. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We're on the road to nowhere. We're on the road to nowhere. We're on the road to nowhere.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was the day President Truman appointed a fact-finding panel to investigate the General Motors strike. As many as 320,000 UAW GM workers had been on strike for nearly 3 weeks. They had suffered deep wage cuts, deteriorating working conditions, and endless contract violations during the war. The UAW workers now demanded a 30% wage increase. increase. But President Truman and GM acted as if it was still wartime. Truman ordered a 30-day cooling-off period to be followed by compulsory arbitration. Just 2 days earlier, 10,000 strikers picketed GM, encircling their downtown headquarters for over an hour. The CIO held an emergency conference vowing to continue and spread the strike. CIO President Philip Murray took to the radio in defense of the strike. He noted that corporations had made millions in wartime profits, that wage cuts since VJ Day had been as high as 50%, and denounced Congress for burdensome new tax laws. Murray added that Truman's proposed Fact-Finding Act and other anti-labor laws served to, quote, weaken and ultimately to destroy labor union organizations. Bob Carter, chairman of the AC Sparkplug Strike Committee and chairman of the Greater Flint CIO Council, remarked, I am against arbitration and will oppose the setting up of fact-finding committees. Anyone acquainted with the labor history of this country knows that those committees are used by political stooges of the corporations to cheat workers out of their just demands. The strike ended in partial victory the following March, with strikers winning a 17.5% raise, just over half their original demand. But UAW members demonstrated their solidarity and their refusal to be cowed into going back to work on the government's terms.
Exposing GOP half-truths, lies, and hypocrisy every weeknight from 9 to midnight. Rick Smith.
Another congressman gets arranged, and we're still working like slaves. There's only one thing I'm asking for. Fight the rich, free the poor. Fight the rich, free the poor. Fight the rich, free the poor. You know it's all the
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Website, ricksmithshow.com. So with, it looks like 90% of the vote in there in Alabama, the two are separated by 576 votes. Stop and think about it. Every vote matters. Right now, you've got 17,081 voters who voted for the other. And I don't know who the other is. Maybe this is where Mickey Mouse got 17,000 votes. I don't know. But I'm looking at the numbers, and there is a really good shot that Doug Jones becomes the next senator from Alabama. Because you look at Mobile, a huge vote center with only 56% of their vote in. You look at Jefferson, and again, you go back to what we said at the beginning. It's going to come down to those heavy four. Jefferson still with 26% of the vote left out. Montgomery still has a little bit of the vote to go yet. It's going to be interesting. Going to certainly be interesting, and see where this goes. I can tell you, I'm guardedly optimistic. Our quote of the day, another one. I've got this one just jumped right out at me. Tennessee Representative Diane Black, evidently running for governor there in the state of Tennessee. Understand, and remember this, back in '86, and I know way back then, Reagan signed into law this was also part of moving to break up really community hospitals and move to the free market version of hospitals that we have today. But as one of the safeguards for saying, you know what, we're just gonna get rid of those community hospitals and we'll let profiteers take them over. We're gonna start running them like businesses because business works. As one of the things that the Republicans, Reagan caved in on, was that hospitals, these for-profit hospitals or profit centers, they wouldn't be able to throw people to the streets. And I've said for a very long time that you're not going to die right now. It's not like you're going to get any continuity of care. It's not like you're going to they're going to really help you. You're not going to die at this moment. If you go into an ER, they're going to save your life at this moment. If you don't have health insurance, they're going to patch you up. They're going to make sure that you're not going to die right now, and they're going to ship you off. Where? Who knows? There's been stories in California of one of the hospitals out there literally paying cabs to drop people on Skid Row. And, some enterprising young reporter went down and took pictures of all of these homeless people with hospital gowns on because they had gone to the hospital for one thing or another. They got their gowns on and out the door they went because they didn't have health insurance. Well, this Diane Black, who evidently says that she is an emergency room nurse, she told Chuck Todd last week that, quote, there are many people who came into my emergency room that I, the nurse, was the first one to see them. I could have sent them to a walk-in clinic or their doctor the next day, but because of the way the law in Congress is put into place, to say no, I have to treat everybody that walks into the emergency room. Yeah, that's the point. And this is what the Affordable Care Act was supposed to help with, so that everybody had health insurance. Everyone had a family doctor. This is the weird thing about listening to someone like Mrs. Black, who doesn't seem to quite understand. And this is someone sitting in the Hall of Power. This is someone who makes legislation. This is someone who could either fix our problems with the health care or make them freaking worse. And I would argue, making them worse. You know, we could have fixed some of the things wrong with the Affordable Care Act. We could have. We could have been doing that for the last 7 years. And we would have been much further down the road. Because you may remember, you go back to 2010 when this was going through. I was saying all along, I don't like it. It's obviously a start, but it's not the be all end all. And much like Medicare was not all that great when it started, every year you worked on it, you made it better, you tweaked it, you twisted it, you fixed things. We haven't had that fixing stage. And I would argue it's people just like her that have done this, that have put this country in this situation. And now I go, no, you know what? No, we can hold healthcare costs. Just send those people away. And you come back and you go, okay, so where do they go? Well, we're going to send them to a walk-in clinic. Well, where are they at? Going to send them to their doctor. Do they have one? No. And this is the frustrating part of all of this. It's this jingoistic kind of politics. You know, of just because I'm in a situation where I can do these things, that means everybody can. And it's this kind of, blinders mentality that scares me about having someone, not just in the House of Representatives, but also in a governor's mansion somewhere. Because these people narrowly craft legislation to harm the very people who are the least among us and the most vulnerable. And you look at some of these social safety net programs. We should have a much more robust social safety net system. We should not have homeless people. We should not have hungry people in this country. The wealthiest country in the world at the wealthiest point in its power. And yet we've got millions of people who go to bed every night hungry. We've got homeless. We've got all of these problems. And what we're doing right now, we're going to give massive tax breaks. Because as I understand, as we speak right now, they are mashing together their tax scheme bills and also considering lowering the top marginal rate. Because remember, they were saying, we're going to leave it right at 39.6. Well, there's actually talk of taking that down to 37%. So not only does the top 1% get, 60% of the spoils. Now we're going to make it even better. And you got this twit who's going, no, but we're going to kick those people. If I say so, they go. Yeah, I got to be honest. That's the last person I want deciding what happens to people. Anyway, looks like the Senate Judiciary Committee, their top Republican, Chuck Grassley, taking a little bit of time away from bashing working people who, for spending all their money on women and booze and, of course, movies. Evidently, he spent a little time saying, you know what, President Trump, maybe you might want to reconsider some of the horrible nominees you've thrown our way, and two in particular. Maybe you just might want to consider it. One of them is a guy named Jeff Madier. His nomination for the U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of Texas. Evidently, he came under fire in 2015 for defending discrimination because, those same-sex marriage people, that's going to lead to polygamy. And those transgender kids were, Satan's plan. That's a guy going to sit on a federal bench. Also, the guy, Brett Talley, and we've talked about Brett Talley before, 38-year-old blogger, I guess, defended the KKK or some nonsense. Has just done some really bizarre stuff. What was the thing he did with the shooting, the Sandy Hook? He said that, people in society need to stop being pansies and man up. I think that's what he said. He's also someone who's heavily into the paranormal, and he likes ghost hunting. Yes, this is someone who's going to sit on the federal bench, the U.S. District Court of the Middle District of Alabama. And why is it always coming back to Alabama? So Grassley's saying, no, you can't move forward. In fact, these two, both by the Bar Association, unqualified, which is extraordinarily rare for the American Bar Association to give someone the unqualified thumbs down. And yet here you have two of them. Now, I understand Mr. Talley has offered to withdraw his name because even he sees the absurdity of his name being thrown into the mix. We'll see what happens there. Now, another one of the unqualified, and this is, again, because Trump has put forth 4 people who are unqualified for the bench. Guy named Leonard Stephen Graz. He will be serving on the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals today. Narrowly won confirmation on a party line vote. Again, now remember, this is a guy unqualified. Hasn't served on a, oh, never mind. What does it matter? They're just putting ideological hacks in charge of our judiciary so that they can have their judicial activists and they can get all of their legislation passed through and rubber stamped and, well, privatized. Because isn't that where it's going all anyway? Until we say no more and we stand up and say enough already. Just kind of a thought. Anyway, going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working. Come to talk.
Faces go sad and old and hearts so fire grow cold. We swore blood brothers against, but when I'm ready to grow young again, and hear your sister's voice calling us home across the open yards. But maybe we could cut someplace of our own with these drums and these guitars. 'Cause we made a promise, we swore we'd always remember. No retreat, baby, no surrender. Blood brothers in the stormy night with a vow to defend. No retreat, baby, no surrender.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1964. That was the day that half of the labor force of France ended a strike that had ground the country to a halt. The strike started on December 10th, and it's estimated that 9 million people participated in the work action. Frustration had been growing amongst French working people since the end of World War II. 2 million of the strikers were civil servants. The main issue of the strike was wages for public workers. Workers were angry that their wages were being eroded by the ever-increasing rate of inflation. In addition, they wanted their wages to be more competitive with pay rates found in the private sector. Striking workers included pool attendants, garbage collectors, postmen, teachers, and bus and subway drivers. Train service into Paris was effectively halted. The public workers were joined by many in the private sector who could not get to work due to the transportation shutdown, and who were also angry about stagnant and declining wages in the country. Telephone service in the country was silent. The strike impacted electric power in the country and kept factories idle. Half of the nation's entire power grid was disrupted. The City of Lights had fallen dark, an effective demonstration of the power of labor. The Chicago Tribune reported that many French stores sold out of their year's supply of candles due to the blackout. Some people went to local churches to purchase candles. In many ways, the 1964 strike was a dress rehearsal for even more extensive strikes that were to follow. 4 years later, in May of 1968, 11 million workers went on strike. They were joined by many university students in a call for changes in the French government.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity
free forever.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
I will oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. I want Congress to pass a set of trade deals. Send a message to Congress to come to an agreement on trade deals.
'Cause they're selling make-believe and we don't buy that here. 'Cause in the real world they're shutting Detroit down, while the boss man takes his bonus pay and jets on out of town. And DC.
Our quote of the day out of the New York Times, Danny Roderick, professor of international political economy at the Harvard Kennedy School. She wrote in the New York Times, Mr. Trump's failure to distance himself from special interest globalization is perhaps not surprising, but it exposes the vacuity of his brand of populism. Despite all his talk about fairness and the need to stand up for ordinary working people, he has little to offer his core constituency. He will exacerbate rather than mend the grievances that made his presidency possible. And if you look at what's happened, the rhetoric, all of the incendiary comments, it's not surprising that we haven't seen much going on. And look, not surprising the renegotiations are being done behind closed doors, just like the TPP that Trump was opposed to, and by the same cast of characters who were negotiating the TPP that Trump was opposed to. Lots of questions, and here to answer some of those questions, I've asked Arthur Stamilow to come talk with us. Arthur is the executive director of the Citizens Trade Campaign. Arthur, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rick.
So, I look at this and I see these comments, and we're going to pull out of NAFTA, it's going to be great, yet I'm not seeing any real progress. Should we be surprised by this?
Well, look, the negotiations are still ongoing, and I think it's really an open question whether we're going to see more of the same or whether we're going to see changes that actually benefit working people. The U.S. Trade Representative is doing some interesting things. He's proposed, allowing countries to opt out of investor-to-state dispute settlement, which is a big offshoring incentive. He's proposed getting rid of many of the waivers on Buy America policies. He's proposed doing some important things on rules of origin to sort of close the back door on parts from China coming in under NAFTA. But what they haven't done yet is the big thing of embracing strong, enforceable labor and environmental standards that are based on these fundamental international agreements that have swift and certain enforcement. That's the thing that we need to prevent more jobs from being outsourced to Mexico, so that companies can take advantage of, the low wages there and the lax environmental standards.
Right. In fact, Canada had said that, as part of their renegotiations, they wanted us to stop pursuing right-to-work laws and things that were actually tearing them down. So by having across the board, worker rights and standards seems to be beneficial to at least two of the three countries, right?
Yeah, no, Canada has proposed what I understand is a very strong labor chapter, and that's one that, for whatever reason, the Trump administration did not immediately embrace. And, so this is the thing that we've been pushing for, trying to get members of Congress to speak out more about. Look, if we don't have strong labor and environmental rights, if we're not raising wages in Mexico, jobs are going to continue to be outsourced, and workers in both countries are going to see their wages go down and down. Mexico just raised its minimum wage, but it's still less than $5 a day, right? American workers can't compete on that. Mexican wages have actually gone down in real wages 9% since NAFTA was enacted.
Right.
So the incentive for companies to keep shipping jobs there is huge, and the only way that's going to change is if we're raising wages and have actual enforceable labor and environmental standards with that swift and certain enforcement in them.
Yeah, but here's the thing. When you look at the policies this administration has already pursued, it's all deregulation. It's all let the free market decide, and really just attacking the kind of things that I think we both agree that have to happen. Those protections for workers, those protections for the environment. I'm looking at this administration and I'm going, I don't know that I'm all that confident that it's going to come out of this agreement.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, if you look at the negotiations, the halfway decent things that have been proposed that would benefit working people are stagnating in the negotiations, and the big, U.S. corporate lobby groups are pushing hard for those not to go anywhere. Meanwhile, things like financial deregulation, food safety deregulation, energy deregulation, telecoms deregulation, all that stuff is moving forward. So that part, that sort of business as usual agenda is definitely moving forward in the NAFTA talks. But the question of whether or not the promises to working people to protect jobs, create new jobs, raise wages is going to be met is still an open one. I believe that if we keep pushing hard, we may see some progress in those areas, or we may at least get the negotiations to collapse, at which point, hey, Trump, are you going to withdraw from NAFTA as you promised, or are you going to stick with business as usual? We'll get to that moment, but it is going to take a lot more public pressure for sure.
Now, I understand this week is the sixth round of renegotiation talks, right?
Yeah, no, negotiations are going on this week in Washington, D.C. And again, labor and environment aren't even on the agenda for negotiations this week. It's the deregulation agenda that's moving forward.
It's because labor and the environment are on the menu, Arthur. Come on.
But the negotiations are supposedly supposed to conclude early next year. So they're getting further ahead, and it's going to come down to this point of, look, are you going to deliver on this stuff, or are you going to withdraw as promised?
So let me ask you this. I mean, one of the knocks I had against the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement was that there were, as I understand it, like three voices for labor and environment out of hundreds of corporate lobbyists. Are we seeing the same dynamic in this renegotiation, that it's basically just all corporate lobbyists and corporate attorneys and very few voices of we the people?
Yeah, once again, the negotiations are taking place completely behind closed doors. The public is barred. The press is barred from knowing what's being proposed in our names. There are a handful of labor advisors, but the vast majority to the negotiations are corporate lobbyists, corporate advisors. And when you've got those people either literally writing the proposals or at least looking over negotiators' shoulders and saying, no, don't do that, try this instead, it's no wonder who these things are going to benefit. I will say, I mean, there have been some interesting proposals in these negotiations, but again, it's going to take massive public pressure to actually deliver on them.
Now, I know this week you guys are doing some of that. On Wednesday, a big thunderclap at a rally in Washington, D.C. What are we hoping comes out of that?
Yeah, we're hoping more and more people are going to call their Congress members and encourage them to demand strong, enforceable labor and environmental standards in the NAFTA renegotiations, a renegotiation that puts people over profits. If Trump wants to get anything through these negotiations, Congress is going to have to vote on it. He could withdraw from NAFTA unilaterally and do that on his own. And at the end of the day, that might be the best possible outcome here. But if he wants to actually get a renegotiated NAFTA approved, that has to go through Congress. And we really need members of Congress to be speaking out more about what a renegotiated NAFTA should look like. Because right now, the corporations are pushing hard day in and day out. And, we need our representatives to be our voices in this.
Do you think that's really a possibility that Trump's going to pull out of this? I mean, given the fact that, this administration is so tied to Goldman Sachs and to Wall Street and into these corporate CEOs, do you really think it's something that he would go against them on and pull out? Because look, they've got a lot of interest, and there's a lot of wealth for the 1% and the wealth class of this country tied up in this agreement.
Yeah, no, if you had asked me in January, would Trump ever do this, given who, most of his advisors are, given it just his history, I would have said there's a 0% chance of him withdrawing from NAFTA. But in the subsequent year, if you look at who he's appointed as trade negotiator, you look at the things he's repeatedly said over and over again, I think there is a shot he could withdraw if the negotiations continue to stagnate. And hopefully we can hold him accountable to his promises and make sure that there's a political cost if he tries to continue with business as usual.
You know, what would that look like? Because I've had a lot of people say, "Well, no, we can't pull out of NAFTA. It'd be too disruptive, and it would send the wrong signal to the rest of the world, and all of this doomsday stuff." What would it look like if Trump were to pull us out of NAFTA?
Yeah, no, a lot of the corporations who make money off this deal, pretending like the sky would fall if NAFTA was withdrawn from, and that there would be no more trade, which is obviously ridiculous. What would happen on the positive side if we got rid of NAFTA was we would immediately be done with ISDS, with the investor state dispute panels, where our laws can be attacked before a tribunal of 3 corporate attorneys. We get rid of the ban on Buy America and Buy Local government purchasing preferences. We get rid of some of the handcuffs on food safety measures and other regulations. But again, that wage differential with Mexico would still be very, very high. And without adding labor and environmental standards, I think we'd continue to still see jobs outsourced, because, the tariffs don't automatically go up through the roof if NAFTA were gone. The WTO is still in effect. So the tariffs, might go up a little bit, but they'd still be quite low. The best solution ultimately would be to replace NAFTA with a deal that actually takes labor and the environment seriously. That's what we continue to be fighting for, whether we get it this administration, whether we get it the future administration. That's ultimately what we need if we want to see good paying jobs here, we want to see raising wages here, and we want to see human rights protected abroad.
Yeah, I mean, those are all the goals. But, again, I worry about the people sitting behind those doors who don't have those particular interests at heart when it comes down to the bottom line. So what do you say to this Danny Roderick quote that, all Trump's really going to do is exacerbate the problem, not really mend the grievances, and ultimately going to do very little to help the core constituents? Because, look, people are really upset that jobs have been lost, that their standard of living has been diminished. We've seen deindustrialization for the past 30 years. What do you say to that?
I agree 100%. If people sit on their hands and they just let things go and they, trust their government to work in their interest on this, absolutely, the corporations are going to see their agenda further. There's going to be more deregulation. There's going to be some window dressing about jobs, but it's not going to be addressed because, again, the Chamber of Commerce, the Farm Bureau, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Business Roundtable, they're out there pushing for what they want in this renegotiation day in and day out. So without a push back, I think, we're going to continue to see what Danny Roderick and others are suggesting, is a likely outcome. That said, I do believe that trade has become such a big issue in U.S. politics, and the president is so out there on it, and members of Congress are increasingly understanding that if they want to get elected, they need to be for U.S. jobs and raising U.S. wages, that the opportunities now are bigger than they've been at any time in the last 25 years. If we continue to push and try to hold our elected officials accountable, there is some opportunity for change right now.
Yeah, it's just a matter of having your voice heard and calling your representatives and yelling and screaming and all of that, but ultimately having a voice in those rooms where the negotiations are happening. And I got to be honest, I don't know, just judging from what I've seen come out of this administration, I don't know that Trump and his folks have my interests at heart.
Yeah, no, I mean, you remember Donald Trump saying that he thinks American workers are overpaid. Clearly he doesn't believe in climate change. He believes in trickle-down economics. It's going to require a lot of pushing to, not even get the ideal of what we want, but to get, a withdrawal as sort of a midpoint, of progress. But I do actually believe if people keep the pressure up, we can sort of put the brakes on this model, possibly in 2018, which sends a big signal. Maybe it doesn't get us everywhere we need to get in the first year, but it sends a big signal that, hey, look, this sort of corporate-centered model of globalization, the opposition to it is strong, and it can't continue like that. We showed them that there was strong opposition with the TPP and stopping TPP from being passed in Congress. And it's going to take that same type of work to start seeing some change on NAFTA.
Yep. And we begin by going to citizenstrade.org. and checking out your website, getting involved, getting information, and becoming an informed citizen and ultimately voter. Arthur, I appreciate you taking some time for us.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I appreciate it.
Good stuff. Thanks so much. I'd love to hear what you have to say. What do you think? Will this Trump negotiating team, will they negotiate in the best interest of American workers, or will it be more of the same? You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. If labor leaders had stood tall and refused to sign the affidavits. Further, he said, quote, "This act is a trap, a pitfall for organizations of labor. This act was passed to oppress labor, to make difficult its current enterprises for collective bargaining, to make more difficult the securing of new members for this labor movement, without which our movement will become so possessed of inertia that there is no action and growth. In a labor movement where there is no growth, there is no security for its existence, because deterioration sets in and unions, like men, retrograde. Despite the split, the United Mine Workers would remain a powerful, independent union for more than 40 years. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Russian President Vladimir Putin made a surprise visit to Syria on Monday, touring a Russian airbase alongside Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. It was Putin's first visit to Syria since Russian troops deployed there in 2015. Putin declared victory over terrorists in the country, and he also ordered an unspecified number of troops to return home. But Putin's announcement didn't signify a true pullout. He went on to say the Hymem Air Base, which Russian troops constructed in 2015, will remain in permanent operation, as will a Russian naval base in the city of Tartus. Protests continue to heat up across cities in the Middle East following President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the Israeli capital last week. Thousands clashed with police in the Lebanese capital of Beirut on Sunday, while thousands also gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia. Trump's move last week has also sparked a war of words against Israel. Turkish President Recep Erdogan declared Israel to be a terror state during a speech on Sunday, while the defense minister of Malaysia has gone as far as to say Malaysian troops could deploy to protect Palestine. And if you thought LinkedIn only generated a bunch of annoying emails and bland corporate blog posts, think again. According to the German government, the corporate networking site is at the center of a Chinese intelligence operation aimed at infiltrating elite government and business circles in Germany. On Sunday, Germany's BFV spy agency accused Chinese intelligence of using fake accounts to target prominent German professionals and try and recruit them as informants. China has denied the German allegations. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery before this war is won. You're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Big win in Alabama. And I'm sure that the market is going to demand recounts, sue, do what they do. But here's the thing. Here's what got me. I mean, just looking at the numbers, and I go back to what I said at the beginning. Heavy turnout in the big four areas, and Jones got it. Win the college areas, Jones did it. And also pick up some of the votes in the highly educated, high income, Republic-leaning counties. Did it, and it's a narrow victory. But it's the victory. Right now, I guess it looks like about 12,000 votes, about 11,000 votes separate them with Jones winning. Now, here's the thing. You had about 1,250,000 votes cast between the two of them. Jones got 638,000 of them. Out of a possibility, and this is the thing that always just blows my mind, out of a possibility of 3.3 million voters. So that meant 2 million people registered to vote, did not. And this is one of those things where, look, I know it's all about who shows up and who gets out to vote and all that, but I've always taken this position that if you're going to complain, if you're going to whine and all of that, you got to participate. You got to vote, man. The fact that more than half did not bother to vote, just mind-blowing. And now this could have been one of those moments. And look, I look at Roy Moore as someone who is such a horrible, horrible candidate. Someone who should not be anywhere near the halls of power. This could have been the protest that people just said, you know what? And I'm being very generous, I think. Just not going out to vote. Just not going to do it. I'm not in good conscience. I'm not going to do it. Now, the other side of this, and looking at the numbers, because I like numbers and I like to see the trends and stuff. Almost 22,000 people got up today and went to vote in Alabama and voted for somebody else. That is, and I don't know who, it could have been Jeff Sessions. It could have been a little squeaky toy. I don't know. It could have been Mickey Mouse. Who knows? Or Mickey Mouse, Jeff Sessions. Never mind. But that right there, to me, a huge decider in this. Now, the reports that we've heard out of voter suppression, like I said at the beginning, it's what the Republican trick bag always is, and which is why the other day we had people coming out and saying, look, make sure your ID is up to date. Make sure the date is not expired. That's the quickest way in a place like Alabama to get thrown off the voting rolls. Make sure that you know where your polling place is, because the trickery will be someone's going to put out a flyer, someone's going to robocall, someone's going to send out texts, someone's going to hold up signs to say, hey, this week we moved the polling place. Or better yet, the other ones that I've heard, and I haven't heard it in this election, but I've heard it in almost every other one. Well, we've changed voting day to Wednesday this year. One of my other favorites. But you look at all of these dirty tricks that the Republicans are famous for, especially in urban areas, putting official-looking people out front. We're checking warrants so that people of color stay home. This was a huge victory. This was in the face of, I go back to when a friend of mine is worked on the campaign. And I remember at the beginning, back before the primary, back before Luther Strange lost and all of that, saying, why would you go down to Alabama and it's going to be a landslide? Because it's Alabama. I mean, you look at the Sessions vote, massive landslide. And he said, you know what? There's an opportunity. This guy, Doug Jones, he's a good guy. This is a stand-up guy, and this is somebody that I want to work for. And I'm like, good on you. Go give it your all. But it's like, banging your head against the wall. And here we are. Here's a perfect, good on him for doing it. And the perfect storm happened. Horrible, lazy, horrible candidate, lazy candidate, and virtually everything you could want all wrapped up into one. So good stuff. And like Bill Scheer said, it's going to be interesting to see what Doug Jones does. Will Doug Jones go to the U.S. Senate and become that guy who's that let's bridge the gaps, let's do what my constituents want, or is he going to go there and be, a champion of working people? It'll be interesting to see what goes on. But a good night, and congratulations to the Jones camp, and congratulations to my buddy. Good stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Back tomorrow. Oh, boy, lots to talk to. We'll get somebody from the Jones campaign to come on, and also going to talk about the next election with another candidate and some more free trade stuff. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks very much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.